Michael Kennedy had walked onto The Ellen Show expecting one of the easiest interviews of his career. As a children's author known for whimsical storytelling, gentle humor, and the kind of charm that made daytime audiences instantly comfortable, he had prepared himself for light banter about his new book, a quirky adventure tale that had already become a modest bestseller. The studio buzzed with its usual cheerfulness, laughing audience members, upbeat music, and Ellen's signature warmth. Kennedy, smiling beneath the bright lights, looked like any guest ready for an afternoon of simple conversation. But the tone shifted the moment Ellen asked about a particular chapter in his novel, one that readers had described as unexpectedly heartbreaking. It depicted a terrified boy waiting alone in a cold hospital corridor, clutching hope like a fragile lifeline as his younger sister fought for her life behind a closed door. Ellen, intrigued by how raw and vivid the scene felt, asked Kennedy what had inspired such an emotionally charged moment in a children's book. The question, innocuous on its surface, struck something deep within him. Kennedy's smile faltered. His gaze dropped to his hands. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words tangled in his throat. A tremor tightened his jaw, his voice cracked. And then, in a whisper barely audible, he said, "I'm sorry," stood up abruptly, and walked off stage. The audience froze. Ellen, taken aback, gently signaled the crew to pause the taping. Behind the scenes, away from the lights and the eyes of millions, Kennedy was hunched forward with his face in his hands, struggling to breathe evenly. When Ellen approached, he managed to speak, though his voice trembled with years of contained grief. The scene in his book, he explained, wasn't fiction at all. It was his own story, an echo of the nights he had spent only months earlier, pacing a hospital hallway as his younger sister, Grace, battled a sudden medical crisis that nearly ended her life. He had kept the ordeal private, even from close friends. He had convinced himself that burying the pain deep enough would make it disappear, that stuffing it into the pages of a novel would somehow transform it into something manageable. He had believed that if he disguised it as fiction, he could forget it had ever been real. But standing under the scrutiny of the studio's lights, confronted unexpectedly with the memory, the ache rose too sharply to repress. The grief he had locked away for months came rushing back with a force he could no longer contain. Ellen listened quietly, not as a talk show host searching for a headline, but as someone who understood the bruising weight of unspoken sorrow. Her voice was soft when she asked if he wanted to return to the stage, or if he needed time, or space, or simply silence. Kennedy breathed slowly, wiping the tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. After a long pause, he nodded. He didn't want to run from the moment, not anymore. When he stepped back onto the stage, the audience greeted him with gentle applause, as if collectively agreeing to meet him where he was, a fragile, shaken, but courageous enough to return. Kennedy's polished composure was gone, replaced with an earnest vulnerability that made the room feel smaller, closer, almost sacred. His hands still trembled as he spoke, yet his words carried a clarity he hadn't managed before. He described the sterile chill of the hospital corridors, the rhythmic beeping of machines that felt like a countdown, the helplessness of sleeping in stiff chairs and praying for strength he didn't have. He spoke of the quiet promises he made beside Grace's bed, all promises whispered into the space between hope and despair, and of the indescribable relief that washed over him the morning she first opened her eyes. As he spoke, audience members wiped tears openly. Some reached for one another's hands. He admitted that for months afterward he had pretended to be fine. He had forced smiles, told jokes, and insisted he was coping because he believed he had to be strong for his family. But the truth was that he had never felt more fragile, and acknowledging that fragility on national television, though terrifying, felt like exhaling after holding his breath for far too long. Then he uttered a sentence that would later explode across social media. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you're not okay. The simplicity of it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories. Within hours of the episode airing, viewers flooded the internet with their own confessions about hidden panic attacks, silent grief, the crushing pressure to appear put together. Kennedy's vulnerability had cracked something open in people who needed permission to be honest about their pain. As the audience slowly rose in a standing ovation, Kennedy looked overwhelmed, humbled. It was as if he realized, all at once, that by tearing down his own walls he had given others a reason to lower theirs. His books had touched many lives, but this memento raw, messy, unfiltered, reached beyond literature into something deeply human. Near the end of the interview, Ellen asked him gently if he wanted to say something directly to his sister. Kennedy's expression softened. This time, his smile carried genuine warmth rather than practiced tease. Looking at the camera, he addressed Grace with the tenderness that thickened the air. He told her she had been the real hero, the one who had fought her way back when the odds had turned against her. He told her he had spent too long pretending strength meant silence, and that he was finally learning that true bravery meant speaking the truth, not hiding from it. The moment was not celebrated for scandal or spectacle but for its humanity. Viewers recognized that Kennedy hadn't fled the stage out of anger or discomfort. He had fled because memory had collapsed onto him with all its weight, because grief doesn't follow a script, because love sometimes breaks us open without warning. When the segment replayed across platforms worldwide, millions saw not a celebrity unraveling, but a human being revealing the wounds he had carried unseen. And in that revelation, they found something rare, a reminder that vulnerability is not weakness but connection, that even those who appear calm may carry storms within them, and that healing often begins the moment someone finds the courage to let others witness their heart.